Hello, welcome back to another Pen Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following along on my journey. This video is going to look at paper products, in particular notebooks that I bought on Amazon. And I look for bargains, you may know that. I look for things that I think are of value. So when I saw this on Amazon, here's the posting. I said, let's take a look at it. And there were a number of notebooks that were similarly designed and similar price, but I think this had more features and had a better price than any of the other ones. And it is made in China. And it's an interesting brand. It's a real, I mean, you pick this up, it feels really heavy. It feels like a good quality book would feel of this size. It's nice that it has this cardboard cover, and then it slips out, and you'll see a notebook with a faux leather, PVC, vinyl, whatever cover on it. But I'm not a person that says I need leather to cover my notebooks with. It feels good in the hand, which is the most important part. It has 3 ribbon bookmarkers, which I think is excellent. It has a little elastic loop here for a pen, which again is good, and that's a good place for it. It also has a little elastic band here to keep it closed once you take it out of the cardboard sleeve. It has a nice expandable insert here to put in loose papers or business cards or note, that you might take on little cards. So I think that's nice. It has a dot grid, which I think they referred to as college rule. We give you the measurements of those lines. There's no page markers. The first sheet is very thick, very substantial. The notebook has a good feel to it. That first page is glued in place, but then once you get past that, it lays flat, which I think to me is a prerequisite to any type of notebook that you're going to use. It's very well stitched. You can see the stitching here. There's a number of those things put together. Overall, it's a great notebook. So I'm going to do some writing in it. See how it responds to ink. It's 120 gram paper. You got 96 pages here, so it's a substantial size. It might last a year for those people that do journaling. It's certainly going to last a while for me. A few weeks ago, I did a Lockbee field journal, which had little elastic bands in to take notebooks like these. I found these on Amazon. The pricing was excellent. Here's the posting on Amazon. They're nice and stitched. It's 100 gram paper. It feels good. And I got 8 of them in 4 different colors. So I think that's really nice. It's a good buy. These will last me a long time and allows you to keep your Lockbee field journal full of notepads for a very reasonable price. I've been writing with different pens on these 2 types of notebooks that I've been reviewing, and I have to be honest and admit that I had unrealistic expectations. Now, I chose to use the Waterman Vintage one with Monteverde Caribbean Blue, which is a fairly lubricated ink that has been aggressive on some other papers, and it seems to have held up pretty well. Then I went to the fine writing with a broad nib in it with the Robert Oster ink, and that shows some nice shading. Then I went to the Waterman 7 I have with the blue nib with Lamy turquoise, and that's my fault. I smeared it. But as you can see, it also held up pretty well. And then there's my C1 with Diamine Bilberry, my Kaigelu 316 with a Noodler's Mass 54th, Parker Duofold Jade with Roher and Klinger Alt Gold Grun. There's a Franklin Christoph ink. Then I have a Wing Sung with a Birmingham ink. And I just wanted to show different varieties and different inks. And there's a TWSBI Eco medium nib with an Iroshizuku ink. So overall, I'd say they held up pretty well, and the ink dries really fast. If you have a dry pen with a nice dry ink in it, it'll dry instantly. 5 seconds salami green, you could smear a little bit, but after 10 seconds it was also dry. So overall, I'd say the paper held up fairly well. If we flip it over, we'll see some bleed through on the 2 vintage pens, which is what I would expect, but really no show through or no bleed through on the other pens. So overall, I'd say the paper held up pretty well. For the smaller notebooks, which are 100 grams per square meter, we'll see a little bit of feathering, more spread of the ink. The Golden Armor came out pretty much about the same. The Waterman 7 got a lot of feathering. The Moonman C1 shows a little bit of feathering also, which I was not expecting. The Mass 54th, again, a little bit more spread than you got with the thicker paper. The Alt Gold Grun held up pretty well. Franklin Christoph. What really was surprising was the TWSBI Eco. Showed more feathering than I would expect. And then I also had to just do one more just to show you a Noodler's Navajo Turquoise, which also held up pretty well. As expected, this dries pretty fast. That's some ink that I put there. If we flip it over, we'll see a lot more bleed through than we saw on the 120, and we also see it with the regular writing. A few spots here where I put down a lot of ink, but generally with a fine nib and a not too aggressive ink, this paper will hold up okay. So I just wanted to put things in perspective. I did some writing on one of my favorite papers, the Maruman Nimusin. And that also, I think it held up about the same way. Not a little bit more resistant to feathering. We flip it over, we'll see bleed through pretty well, but they are fairly wet nibs that I'm writing with a fairly wet ink. If we go to the Clairefontaine, the 90 grams per square meter, we don't see any feathering, which is what we would expect. And I laid down some pretty good ink there. If we flip it over, we see no bleed through, no ghosting. So I just wanted to put that in perspective with the different papers. So overall, what's my verdict? I would say that these are priced appropriately. The features that you get in the Yates, and who knows how to pronounce it, in this notebook, I don't think any other notebook will come close to having those type of features. The paper in both notebooks is very smooth, feels good to write on. You get a decent amount of feedback, more than you get on Rhodia or Clairefontaine. You get less feedback than you would get with the Fabriano Equiqua, which is what I use for my pen reviews. But because if you're going to use with a vintage wet nib, then this is probably not the paper you're going to be writing on. It's not going to bleed through to the other page, but it's certainly not going to be something you might want to write on both sides. But with a medium nib or a fine nib, this paper will work great. It looks good. I mean, it showed off the colors of the ink very well. It also shows a decent amount of shading. So if those are things that are important to you, these notebooks would work well for that. I didn't like the paper in the Pen BBS notebooks, and I finished up the one that I had, and a couple pens I just couldn't use the other side of the page at all. And I've also looked at other 100-gram Chinese notebook paper, and it doesn't have the coating that Clairefontaine or Rhodia has, and certainly nowhere near Tomoe River. And I didn't even use Tomoe River in this example because I don't think it's appropriate. But then Tomoe River, you may wait a minute for the ink to dry. You know, relatively speaking, it's going to take a longer time to dry because the ink is going to sit up on top of the paper, not soak into the paper. And that to me is part of the science of putting together a notebook with a paper that's going to be fountain pen friendly. You know, if you're using a ballpoint, it's just going to dry anyways pretty well instantly, so that's not as critical. But when you're using a fountain pen, you need to balance out how much it absorbs ink versus how much it resists feathering and bleed through, which is, you know, part of the downside of absorbing ink. So for that reason, I think these notebooks, especially the Yeats, would work well as a daily writer for journaling where you're not going to be using a vintage pen probably. Or if you want to carry a notebook around for quick notes, I think they would also work for that. So hopefully you found this interesting. Family tries to get me gifts for Christmas that are related to pens. So they got me this pad of paper. And normally sketch pads are not something I look for fountain pens. And it comes from Appleton, Wisconsin. Interesting. So much to my pleasure and amazement, here are two of the pens that really wreaked havoc with some of the writing on the Chinese papers. You can see here, no feathering. And this Caribbean blue really looks beautiful on this paper. And just for reference, here's that Fullawin 017 medium spear with that diamond ink that I was used to testing on the other papers. Let's look at what it did. This paper feels smooth, little texture to it, which is fine with me. I'd say it's 150 or 160 grams per square meter, so it's a very thick paper relative to what we write on, like 3 times thicker than Tomoe River paper. So as expected on the other side, there's no ghosting, no bleed through, nothing. So this paper is certainly as fountain pen friendly as you're going to come across. Hopefully you find notebooks that you like, because without paper, the fountain pen kind of loses its functionality. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day, a great life. You know, enjoy all the different things that life offers us. We're going to say bye now until the next video.